Hello everyone, this is Randy here, and I am standing at the base of the beautiful Castel San Angelo in the eternal city of Rome. This is a unique building that used to be many years ago Emperor Hadrian's mausoleum, but it's since been rebuilt and repurposed into many different functions, including a fort, a prison, a residence, and now a tourist attraction. I want to talk to you today about the city of Rome, and perhaps in an alternate timeline, what would happen if Rome did not exist today. I'm just gonna turn the camera around, so that's me. You can see the beautiful castle in the back. I wanted to talk about an alternate history where Rome today, modern Rome, ceases to exist. And in fact, the modern world looks very different. I'll start by saying that it's a miracle that Rome and the Roman Empire lasted for such a long period of time, right? For by some historic accounts, 1,000 years from the date of the start of the Republic to the end of the empire, and if you count the Eastern Roman Empire, perhaps another 1,000 years. Right, and there's some debate as to when it started and when it ended, but we're looking at rough timelines here of 1,000 years for the Western Roman Republic and Empire. So a long time, and during that time, Rome was the global superpower of its time, the dominant cultural, political, economic force. At the height of the Roman Empire, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, for example, Rome spanned 3 different continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Right? It was a force to be reckoned with. It had the strongest military, centralized government. Romans were brilliant engineers that built aqueducts and buildings and temples that still last to today. But what if this came to a crashing end about 2,000 years ago? What if there's an alternate history where Rome is defeated by another power? That power is the subject of today's video, and that power is Carthage. See, there was another competing civilization, let's call them a civilization, at the time when Rome was still growing and expanding. And that civilization was Carthage, which was for also a long period of time a very key Mediterranean power. Rome has always been a Mediterranean power because it's founded on the Italian peninsula, and its power stretched first and foremost up the Italian peninsula and then, of course, around the Mediterranean. But there was a rival power. The city of Carthage, and of course its subsidiaries and colonies and possessions, but the city of Carthage is founded or situated in what would be modern-day Tunisia, close to the capital city of Tunis. And Carthage was a Phoenician colony. So the Phoenicians are from what would be the area that is now modern-day Lebanon. So they were a seafaring people, and Carthage was founded hundreds of years ago, and I think it was founded even earlier than the city of Rome, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to have to double check that, but I believe that Carthage is actually an older city, and the Carthaginian civilization is actually older than Rome. I recall that it would probably have been founded somewhere between 600 to 800 BC. I will double check that. If you have the particular date that Carthage was founded, that you comment below in this video and tell me the particular date. But I believe it was sometime between 600 and 800 BC. So an older civilization that was founded on the principles of, or not the principles, but they were well known for the following characteristics. They were well known for being good seafarers, in that they had the ability to navigate water using ships, and they were good with navigating the Mediterranean. They were able to travel using their navy and using ships much better than the Romans did. The Romans were a land-based people, and were never particularly good at ocean and sea navigation, unlike the Carthaginians, who are seafaring people, and they have a very strong seafaring tradition. This would become quite important during the Punic Wars, which were 3 wars fought between these two great civilizations, Rome and Carthage. This clash of titans, if you will, between these two really important and culturally significant civilizations. Carthage and their culture was based more on trade than well, maybe not more on trade, but certainly trade was a particular trade was of particular significance in Carthage. They were commercial-based people. Rome traditionally is known as sort of a military-based civilization. They were very strong with their military and conquering things. And Carthage was, yes, they had colonies and possessions outside of the city of Carthage, but they were more interested, all in all, if I were to generalize, in trade, in commerce. So they were more interested in trading with foreign nations and foreign groups of people, perhaps more so than the Romans. The Romans just wanted to take you over and Romanize the territory, right? Turn you into part of Rome, force you to speak Latin, that type of thing. But the Carthaginians, at least based on the historic records, which coincidentally most of it is Roman records, and there's a reason for that I'll explain later. But the Carthaginians were more interested in commerce and trade. Not to say that they didn't have a strong military, but trade was very important to them. So that's another characteristic of their particular civilization. Their language was very different than Latin. Not much is known about their language, and I don't believe anyone currently speaks Carthaginian. I think most of the records were lost, and Carthage, the city, at the end of the Third Punic War, was actually completely destroyed by Rome. Their language and a lot of their culture was lost about 2,000 years ago, after the destruction of their civilization and their city. So that's why a lot of what we know about Carthage actually comes from Roman historians and Roman sources rather than Carthaginian sources. Just out of interest, at the Met Museum in New York, there's a small Carthaginian exhibit. It's not very large, which probably suggests that most of the Carthaginian artifacts are, or that there's not that many surviving Carthaginian artifacts. But there was, I recall, the palm tree being a very important insignia or symbol in Carthage in Carthaginian civilization. I don't know what it means, but the palm tree, the image of the palm tree, was of important significance to them. I don't know if it represented a particular letter in their alphabet or a particular symbol, or maybe it had religious meaning, but if you see Carthaginian carvings and engravings, some of which survive, and you can see at the Met Museum in New York, you'll see a lot of palm trees. So that's what I remember. The other letters and other symbols, I don't quite remember. But the language and the culture is still remains mostly a mystery, due to the fact that a lot of it was destroyed by the Romans. There were 3 wars fought between Rome and Carthage. So for the First Punic War, the Second Punic War, and the Third Punic War. The first started in 264 BC, the second in 218 BC, and the third in 149 BC, when Carthage was then completely destroyed. The Second Punic War obviously is known, or probably the most famous of the 3 wars, because that's when Hannibal crossed the Alps with the elephants, and most people know about this story, how Hannibal crossed the Alps with I'm going to walk forward here. Hannibal crosses the Alps with the elephants, and he has these successful battles against the Roman army, including a very significant victory on the battlefield of Cannae, Cannae, I believe, Cannae, or maybe there's one N, but something like that, Cannae or Canae. There's a battlefield where he decimates the Roman legions by surrounding them, and wins these particularly famous battles, and almost takes over Rome in the Second Punic War. He fails to do so, and he fails to capitalize on his military successes, and ends up living off the land and stays in the Italian peninsula for a period of time, then eventually returns home. So he fails to conquer Rome and destroy the Roman Republic. And it was a republic at the time. The empire would come 200 years later, but this would have been the Roman Republic. The First Punic War started with some territorial disputes. At the time, Carthage ruled what is modern-day Sicily, and the Romans obviously they eventually wanted that piece of land. So there was some territorial disputes over essentially expansion and influence in the Mediterranean. Carthage was based in North Africa, and Rome obviously based in Italy, modern-day Italy. So they had some conflict over. It started with a conflict over that territory, and then descended into an all-out war, where the Carthaginian navy first had a particular advantage, but then the Romans were able to defeat the Carthaginians eventually after several decades of war. There's some really cool military history with respect to how the Romans defeated Carthage, and how they turned a land-based army into one that was at least competitive with the Carthaginians at sea, including inventing certain inventing certain types of machines or mechanisms to create the ability to send their soldiers from one ship to another. There was these little planks that they created, which was really cool, where they could send their soldiers over and board other ships. So they're like Roman Marines, if you will, boarding enemy ships. So that was one of the mechanisms they had invented, which was pretty cool. And that was part of the First Punic War. The Second Punic War obviously is the most famous, involving Hannibal, the crossing of the Alps, the elephants. He led what would probably be considered a multinational force of cavalry and infantry and archers from all different tribes, many of whom were African tribes, and they again fought a pretty epic war At that time, at the time of the Second Punic War, Carthage had some significant possessions in the Iberian Peninsula, which is essentially modern-day Italy and Spain. So they had some colonies and possessions and land holdings in that area. And that was another area of contestation between Rome and the Carthaginian Empire. Or I'm not sure if empire is the correct word, but the Carthaginian nation, if you will, civilization. And then the Third Punic War was a bit of a disaster for Carthage. They were utterly destroyed. It was no contest. The first war was at least one where you can imagine equal forces fighting each other. The second war was where Carthage almost won, but failed to topple Rome. And the third was unfortunately just a beating, where Carthage was utterly destroyed. The city was burnt down, demolished. The ground was salted so that it could never be, the ground could never have, fertile farmland again. That's how much the Romans hated the Carthaginians. They put, at least that's what the legend or historians say, that the Romans put salt in the ground, salted the ground, so that the Carthaginians could not grow crops in the future, so the city could never be rebuilt ever again. And in fact, it was never rebuilt. So whatever the Romans did, it was successful, because that was the end of Carthage. So that's the background, right? You have this other Mediterranean civilization based in North Africa, right? That has hundreds of years of history, that was now encroaching on Rome's ambitions in the Mediterranean. There's 3 wars that last almost 100 years between the wars, right? There's obviously breaks in between and peace treaties, but 3 wars that 80 to 100 years between these 3 wars, and then the Carthaginian civilization ends. Now, here's where the alternate history comes in, which is something that I find pretty fascinating, which is this. What if, for example, Carthage wins the Punic Wars, or at least one of them? So suppose the most plausible would be the Second Punic War, where Hannibal actually conquers Rome. So after winning the Battle of Cannae, this famous military victory of his, instead of just hanging out in the Italian peninsula and doing whatever he was doing there, he marches on to Rome, right? Actually, one of his generals said that to him at the time, which is, Hannibal, you know how to secure a victory, but you don't know how to capitalize on it. I'm paraphrasing, but something to that extent, that you know how to secure a victory on the battlefield, but you don't know how to capitalize it. So he didn't turn his battlefield victory into a pure political victory, in that the political victory would have been to tip the center of balance and to take over Rome, right? Rome would have been the center of balance, and that he did not achieve. Instead, he just kind of, lived off the land for a decade and, did some raids here and there, but was never able to overthrow Rome. But suppose he does. Suppose Hannibal makes an audacious drive towards Rome proper, the city of Rome, this city right here, the one that I'm walking in. He makes an audacious drive. At the time, some historians believe that his unwillingness to go to Rome was because of his lack of siege equipment. Suppose he makes the siege equipment, right? So that's not a barrier. I'm sure he was smart enough to engineer siege equipment if he really wanted to. At least that's one theory. So suppose he for some reason he's able to take over Rome. And what happens to Carthage in the Third Punic War happens to Rome. Rome is, in this alternate history, completely destroyed, utterly obliterated by the Carthaginian army. Hannibal salts him, personally sprays salt, onto the soil so that Rome will never rise again, that the ground will never be fertile, you can never grow crops here, and the city suffers unimaginable defeat. And the Italian peninsula is subjugated and becomes just part of the Carthaginian Empire. I'm going to use the term empire here for the rest of the video. They become part of the Carthaginian Empire. Hannibal, now remembered as one of the most audacious and successful generals in ancient history, probably only rivaled by Alexander the Great, right? So suppose that's, and the Second Punic War starts in 218 BC, but suppose that's how it ends, with the destruction of Rome. And this is really pivotal, because imagine if that actually happens, and Rome ceases to exist, right? What are the implications of that, right? Of the Roman Republic dying in its nascent stage, where it never goes to the empire stage. It just dies as the Roman Republic in around 200 BC. And we have a Carthaginian world, a Carthaginian hegemony, a Carthaginian dominance over the Mediterranean. So I've been thinking about this, and I think there are several really interesting implications. First, the entire political idea of Western civilization, the cultural political idea of Western civilization, I think would go on its head, right? Western civilization would no longer be based in Europe. Western civilization would have its base in North Africa, and it would be a very different way of looking at the world. So suppose we're in 2024 right now, 2024. I think the way that we see the Western world would not be centered on, say, Greco-Roman history, right? Because Greco-Roman history has had a significant influence on the Western world. But instead, it's Carthaginian or North African or something along those lines. That the center of the universe is not, the historic and cultural centers is not Greece and Rome, but instead North Africa, right? Where modern day Tunisia is, right? That becomes a cultural mecca of Western civilization and of subsequent Mediterranean civilizations. Because if you control the Mediterranean, you control, as one historian pointed out, the most robust trading center in the world, right? You have so many civilizations trading along the Mediterranean, so many cultures and so many groups trading along the Mediterranean, that this was one of the reasons why, at least according to some historians, the Industrial Revolution happened in Europe first, rather than some other countries, is because of the intensive trade in the Mediterranean, according to some historians, right? And this is not an uncommon theory. But in this alternate history, the Mediterranean is now dominated by a force based in North Africa, right? A Carthaginian civilization, a Carthaginian superpower as opposed to a Roman superpower. And Rome nobody remembers anymore, because the Carthaginians destroy Roman history, the artifacts, the writing, the statues. It's all burnt to the ground. Nobody remembers this civilization, because the Carthaginians do what the Romans did to the Carthaginians, right? The total cultural destruction of their city. So it just imagining that is mind blowing. This cultural and political force. I would imagine that the Carthaginians would not have stopped at Rome, since they were also expanding. So they would have then over years expanded further, right? Expanded up the Italian peninsula. They would have perhaps become what the Roman Empire had become, which is an empire of three continents, right? At the height of the Roman Empire, as I said earlier, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, Rome spanned from Hadrian's Wall in England all the way down to through the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain, to North Africa. They had all of Egypt by that time. As some of you may remember, Egypt became a Roman province when Cleopatra allied with Mark Antony and was thus defeated by Octavius, who became the first emperor of Rome, Augustus. Right? That's common history that most people learn in school. That Egypt, at the time ruled by the Ptolemies, they become a Roman province. So Rome had Egypt, they had North Africa at the time, they had Syria, they had for example, the city of Palmyra was a Roman city. They had all of these territories up to the Rhine. Obviously, most of you know that there was a famous battle in the Teutoburg forests where the German so-called barbarians, so that's a very controversial word these days, but the German tribes defeated the Roman legions in the Teutoburg forests, and the upper part of the Rhine was then never Romanized, right? So maybe that would still happen. We'd have a Carthaginian Empire that would have been the size of Rome, perhaps, right? So if you look at the map of Rome, the Roman Empire, but instead it's a Carthaginian Empire, but I bet they would have stretched further down in Africa as well, because they're based in Africa. So the Carthaginian Empire would have gone further down in Africa. In ancient times, the Central Africa, or further, I don't know exactly where it is, but certainly not North Africa, but further in the south of Africa was known as, I believe, Nubia was the name given, the ancient name. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think Nubia and the term Numidian perhaps is what they refer to that area of Africa, which was further south of North Africa. At least one of the names given to that area. So I would imagine the Carthaginian Empire would expand further down Africa, and perhaps they would have stopped the Rhine along where the Romans stopped. Maybe they would have gone across the Adriatic to modern day Croatia, and then eventually to Romania. And who knows what the empire would have looked like, but it would have been perhaps a very large empire. Certainly with more of an African flair. So I would imagine, because again, you have a civilization based in North Africa, it would be easy for them to expand southwards. So you have more of an African influence in Western civilization, if we can still call it that at this point, right? Western civilization has a more African and North African flair, with more African and North African influence. And then who knows what other possessions they would have held. Certainly they had, against Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula at the time of the Second Punic Wars. So I can't imagine they would have stopped there. They would have kept going, right? They would have kept going northwards. So the map at the height of the Carthaginian Empire would have been really interesting. So that's the cultural, political world, right? That would have been the founding civilization of everything we know as the Western civilization, right? The Roman Empire would have been the Carthaginian Empire. What are the other implications beyond this complete shift in political power? Language would have been another implication, because Rome, as you know, Romans spoke Latin, and all of the languages, which are Romantic languages, derive from Latin. French, Italian, Romanian, Portuguese, Spanish, and then of course there's some Latin influences in English. So if Carthage had taken over those territories eventually as part of the Grand Carthaginian Empire, certainly Latin would not have been the language they would have spoken, right, in these territories. It would have been Carthaginian or some other type of language. Now the Romans, when they conquered people, they like to Romanize them. So they imposed their economic system, their legal system, their linguistic system on the people that they conquered. As I said earlier in the video, the Carthaginians maybe were a little bit less inclined to do that. They were more into trade, so maybe they would have, and certainly as evidenced by the makeup of Hannibal's army, which was very multinational and multicultural, they were able to, at least at that time, sustain sort of a multinational coalition, if you will, of different cultures and different groups. So perhaps they would have allowed local languages to flourish instead of imposing one particular language. That's one possibility. Or maybe not. Maybe they would have imposed some type of imperial language, right? The language of the empire upon these territories and tribes that it would have subjugated. And if that were the case, certainly it would not have been Latin. So people, if Carthage had won the war and the Carthaginian Empire became a reality, then we wouldn't be speaking these languages, right? The languages we commonly know as French, Italian, English, to an extent, Portuguese, Spanish, Romanian. These romantic languages would certainly not sound, well, they wouldn't exist because Latin would have been wiped out after the fall of Rome, right? So nobody would speak a Latinized language. Perhaps we would still have Germanic languages because, again, we know the Roman Empire never managed to conquer all of the Germanic territories or the territories that are now Scandinavia. And certainly Slavic languages would still exist because the Romans never managed to conquer all of those territories to the east. So perhaps you would still have Germanic languages, those tribes that spoke Proto-German would still speak those languages. And the Slavic languages would exist, but the Latin language would now be would cease to exist in the territory that would normally, in this reality, in this historic timeline, speak Latin languages, would speak some type of Carthaginian or maybe an African variant, right? Because again, the center of the universe would be North Africa. So to think about that, we wouldn't, if Rome fell, we wouldn't be communicating in English. Because English, not this version of English, right? We would be communicating in some very different language. The languages, in the history of languages, would be very different. The next is religion. Christianity spread mainly because of the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine was the first Roman emperor to adopt Christianity as the official religion of the state, or of the empire, right? So I doubt if Carthage had won the war and destroyed Rome, that Christianity would have spread in the same way, or if it would even exist at all. And if it were to exist, it certainly would not have spread in the same way. I think the history of Christianity would have been very different, and it may have taken on a different form, but I would doubt it would be the exact same form and spread in the exact same way. So if you think about it, without the language, the Romantic languages, and without Christianity, and without Rome and Greece, these neoclassical influences being the bedrock of Western civilization, like, you're looking at a completely different world, because Christianity and Greco-Roman classical influences, they are the bedrock of Western civilization. You walk into any art gallery and any museum, and you will realize that it's Christianity and Greco-Roman cultural influence that is the bedrock of Western civilization. And imagine you erase all of that. Perhaps it would have been some kind of Carthaginian religion. There are some archaeologists who found that the Carthaginians practiced human sacrifice, for example, and they killed babies. And you can verify this, but there's some archaeologists who hypothesize that there was human sacrifices. Maybe it would have been a very brutal pagan religion that was then eventually perhaps in this alternate reality, alternate timeline, alternate historic timeline, then supplanted by some type of monotheistic religion. But would it have been Christianity in our modern sense of Christianity? I doubt it. I think there would have been just so much. The timeline would be so different, and the political situation and the cultural influences would have been so different that I don't think Christianity would have spread in the same way, if it would have spread at all, because Christianity spread because of the Roman Empire, because it became the official religion of the empire. At first, obviously, the Christians were persecuted, but eventually it was adopted as the official religion. So we've talked about language. We've talked about politics. We've talked about religion. I want to talk about exploration as well, because remember, in the beginning of the video, I told you that the Carthaginians were seafaring people, right? They were very good at going out into the sea and exploring. So they were much better seafaring people, naval and I guess is aquatic the word? No, I don't think that would be the word. But they were maritime. That's the word. They were certainly a maritime nation, unlike the Romans. So my theory is that they would have kept that tradition alive, the maritime tradition, and they would have certainly explored perhaps more than the Romans would have. And that would possibly also mean the exploration and the discovery of the New World. It's very possible that had Carthage taken over Rome and became the dominant force in the Mediterranean, and then the dominant empire of what would be the Western world, that 1492 maybe would have happened in 492. And I'll repeat that. 1492 may have happened in 492. That, 1492 is when Columbus obviously discovered the New World, or rediscovered the New World. There's some evidence the Vikings went to Newfoundland and to the New World first, but we'll say for the purposes of this video that that's when Columbus discovered the New World. But perhaps that would have happened in this alternate history timeline 1,000 years prior, right? Imagine a seafaring empire that was keen on navies, keen on maritime technology, good sailors, and we know that the Carthaginian Empire had already possessed a large part of the Iberian Peninsula. They had already a base in Spain and Portugal. They would just need to build a ship big enough to go across the Atlantic. Maybe it would have been possible in 492 AD, 600 years after the Second Punic War. Very, very possible. I mean, give it 600 years of technology. Plus, we know that the Carthaginians, as I said in the beginning, were very keen on trade, right? They were, unlike the Romans, who were a bit more into, military conquest, and then there's the Carthaginians perhaps would have traded more and would have been more interested in advances in technology. This is just a hypothesis, but the Romans were not as interested in technology. There's not a word in Latin for technology, at least according to my classics teacher in high school, but there's a term for skill, which is ars, A-R-S, ars. But there's no word for technology, right? So the Romans didn't advance their technology in the same way. They were very good at building roads. They were very practical people. They were pragmatic. They were hardy people. They were good engineers. They were brilliant. The Roman roads are still used today. They were brilliant engineers, but they used slave labor, and they were not very good at necessarily building efficiencies. Not in the same way that we would think of technology in the modern sense of technology. They kind of just got more or less stuck with the same technology over and over again. If you look at the time of the Roman Republic to the end of the empire, the technology didn't advance that quickly. Certainly, there were not technological advances in leaps and bounds. So they were using, obviously better technology, but arguable at the end of the empire. I think things collapsed more or less. But during the course of the 1,000 years, the technology certainly improved, but it wasn't by exponential means. If you look at a civilization like Carthage that was more into trade, perhaps they would have traded with other civilizations in the Near East. Maybe even if they could somehow reach by land routes, or somehow trade with China, some of the other civilizations, India, that would have been another civilization that they probably would not have been able to conquer, but they would have been able to trade with. They would have been able to, controlling most of the Mediterranean, if not all of the Mediterranean, they would have been able to do a lot of trade. And very possibly with trade and with the exchange of ideas, there would be more technology. So it's very possible that they could have had, by 492, in this alternate history, the technology and the know-how to build ships that could travel across the Atlantic. Maybe they could have, maybe not, but it's something fun to think about. Certainly they were seafaring people, we know that for sure. They were seafaring maritime people. They were good at maritime navigation. They had a knack for building ships and for navigating stormy waters. It would not be an illogical leap to imagine that within 600 years of the fall of Rome in this hypothetical alternate Punic War, that they would have had the technology and the resources to build ships big enough and strong enough to cross the Atlantic. So that's what I would imagine, that there could, the history of the world in that sense, the discovery of the New World, could have happened a lot earlier, and the implications of that, who knows what the implications of that would have been. And finally, I would conclude that like any empire, the Carthaginian Empire, I believe, would have also ended, right? Nothing lasts forever. The Roman Empire didn't last forever, even though they won against Carthage, but eventually they collapsed. The British Empire didn't last forever. Alexander the Great's empire didn't last forever. Hitler's empire, the Third Reich, if you would have called it an empire, didn't last forever. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in the entire world, lasted for about 200 years. Started with Genghis Khan and then Kublai Khan, and it stretched from China to, they sacked Baghdad at one point, right? They went all the way to the Middle East. They had parts of Europe. They had a large part of Russia. The largest empire in the entire world was not the Roman Empire, it was the Mongol Empire, right? The Mongol Empire was the largest land empire in the entire world, and that didn't last. That lasted maybe about 200 years, and then it collapsed, right? So empires collapse, rise and fall, right? Empires rise, empires fall. So I would believe that inevitably the Carthaginian Empire, for whatever reason, internal or external, would have also reached its demise. It would have been in many ways like Rome, or what happened to the Roman Empire. That at the end, I don't know what the demise would have looked like, but they would have, I believe, reached this demise. And whenever there is a system collapse of an empire, there's usually a dark age, right? There's an age of fragmentation, of rival powers, of rival warlords, lack of central administration, like what happened after the collapse of Rome, right? You saw the Dark Ages. Which gave birth to the modern countries of Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire, at least in the West. That gave way to the Dark Ages and to the medieval age, where the countries of France, England, and eventually other countries like Italy. Of course, Italy became a country in the 1860s, modern Italy, but these national identities would have come to exist, and with the collapse of the Carthaginian civilization, and I believe that inevitably it would have collapsed. I don't think it would have lasted to modern days. For whatever reason, it would have collapsed. It would have left behind a fragmented, at least momentarily fragmented world, but it would have maintained that legacy. right? The legacy of Carthage, the language, the culture, the religion would have been maintained in the consciousness, in the social and political and religious fabric of these particular countries and particular regions that would have been left behind. And the map of the world would look very different. The map of Europe and North Africa would look very different where the borders are, right? As a result of the inevitable collapse of the Carthaginian Empire. And maybe a new empire would have come along. Who knows? Maybe it would have been the Ottomans, or maybe the Chinese, or the Indians, or some other African group, or the Egyptians. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe some other group would have unified the Mediterranean world, or created a new empire, and maybe not. We don't know, but I know for sure that the Carthaginian Empire would have at some point collapsed. But the legacy of their empire then would exist, and the modern world would be in many ways a child of the Carthaginian Empire. So that's food for thought in this alternate historic timeline. It's very sad that we don't know much more about the Carthaginian people and their language and their culture, because a lot of the history was destroyed by the Romans. So we have fragments that are left. I wish I knew more about them, but this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, which is this alternate history where Carthage ends up being the dominant force in the Mediterranean and the center of Western civilization. Certainly it would have been a monumental historic change, and we wouldn't even know it, because the reality that we live in now, if that were to take place, the subsequent reality would just be the normal reality, right? So it would just not be we would not perceive it as any different. We would see this as normal. But it's interesting to think about these particular critical moments in history as to what could have happened. For example, had Hannibal won the Second Punic War, right, and destroyed Rome. Like, all of these things that I talked about subsequently could have then happened in terms of cause and effect. I hope you enjoyed this video about alternate history. I hope you, those of you who've never been to Rome, I hope you get a chance to visit. The reason I'm filming this video at night is because it's very hot during the day. There's a heat wave going on in Rome. We can blame global warming and climate change for that, but that's why I'm filming at night. During the day, this would be almost next to impossible to stand in one place and film like this. I think I would collapse. So if you get a chance, do come visit Rome, because it's a beautiful, beautiful city, a lot to see, many historic monuments, museums, not just ancient Roman history, but you'll get to see a Renaissance history and early modern Italian history. Really, really cool. The city feels like an open air museum. There's statues and monuments and fountains everywhere. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. Highly recommended to visit. Don't necessarily recommend it to live. There's some issues I've experienced being in Rome now for a while. I don't necessarily recommend living here, but certainly certainly come and visit if you get the chance. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video about alternate history. I hope you enjoyed the view of, again, Castel San Angelo in the back. I'm going to turn the camera. I'll finish by stating that just a fun little fact about this castle. The top statue you see at the very top is Saint Michael, the angel, Saint Michael, who's overseeing this castle. And as well, every year there's actually a really large fireworks show that's hundreds of years of history for this fireworks show, but there's a fireworks show that is released from this castle, which has a lot of significance for the people of the city. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see all of you in the next one. Hope you have a great evening, and have a wonderful time thinking about the Carthaginian Empire and what maybe could have happened.